Dear shareholders, dear sir, dear madam, I would like to welcome you to the second annual general meeting of medmix Limited. I'm Greg Guillaume, the chairman of the board of directors of medmix. I hereby formally open the annual general meeting and ascertain invitation. The invitation of the shareholders to today's annual general meeting has been published in the Swiss Official Gazette of Commerce on the 31st of March 2023. The statutory notice period of 20 days provided for in Article 700 of the Swiss Code of Obligations has thus been complied with. On the same day, the agenda and the proposals were also sent to the shareholders by mail. Pursuant to Articles 699A and 734 of the Swiss Code of Obligations, the company needs to give the shareholders access to the annual report, the compensation report, and the auditor's reports no later than 20 days before the annual general meeting. This is the case. Since the 22nd of February 2023, the complete annual report with the compensation report and the auditor's reports can be viewed and downloaded from our website. Furthermore, the resumes of the proposed members of the board of directors are available on our website. In advance of the annual general meeting, no requests for the inclusion of items on the agenda were received from shareholders, nor were there any counter-proposals or questions regarding items on the agenda. The meeting has therefore been convened in accordance with the law and the Articles of Association and constitutes a quorum regarding the published agenda items. Presence. At today's annual general meeting, entry control was carried out electronically. We will announce prior to your voting on the various agenda items the number of shareholders present and the number of votes represented, as well as the votes assigned to the independent proxy. I'm pleased to inform you that the following persons are also present at today's annual general meeting. My fellow members of the board of directors sitting in the first row in the room, I would like to introduce. Let's start with Marco Musetti, Vice Chairman. Marco. Daniel Flammer, David Metzger, Barbara Engern, and René Willy. Rob ten Hout had to apologize for not being able to participate to today's annual general meeting. He's marrying his son, or his son is getting married, and therefore he had to excuse himself, which I think is a valid excuse. I don't know how many sons he has, but it seems like a valid excuse. With me on stage are three members of medmix Executive Committee. Ms. Iti Satpati, Chief Human Resource Sustainability and Communication Officer. Ms. Jenny Dean, Chief Financial Officer. And Gert Zimmermans, Chief Executive Officer. On stage is also Xavier Schops, Group General Counsel and Company Secretary. I would like to also introduce the head of functions and businesses that are present today. Let's see, where are they? Over there, I'm sorry. As head of segments, Roman Tonig. Roman. Head of industry, Dominique Vonnier. Head of drug delivery, Aishe Sanliogu. Head of dental and surgery, and Oliver Vogel, head of beauty. As head of functions, Holger Warth, head of technology and innovation, and Sheil Gill, head of M&A strategy and investor relations. Auditors. medmix auditors KPMG AG, Zurich, are represented by Mr. Simon Niklaus. I would also like to welcome our independent proxy, Proxy Voting Services GmbH, represented by Dr. Christoph Elbling, attorney at law in Zurich. I'm pleased to hand over now to Dr. Christoph Elbling, who is representing Proxy Voting Services GmbH. Christoph, please.
Thank you. Sehr geehrte Aktionärinnen und Aktionäre, mein Name ist Christoph Helbling. Ich bin Gesellschafter und Geschäftsführer der Proxy Voting Services GmbH in Zürich, welche von Ihnen an der letztjährigen Generalversammlung für eine Amtsdauer von 1 Jahr als unabhängige Stimmrechtsvertreterin Ihrer Gesellschaft gewählt wurde. Als unabhängige Stimmrechtsvertreterin bestätige ich Ihnen gerne, im Sinne von Artikel 689c Absatz 5 des revidierten Obligationenrechtes, dass wir der Gesellschaft nicht früher als 3 Werktage vor der Generalversammlung allgemeine Auskünfte über die eingegangenen Weisungen erteilt haben. Diese allgemeinen Weisungen beinhalteten eine Zusammenfassung der uns von den Aktionären erteilten Ja, Nein und Enthaltung Stimmen pro Traktandum. Ich bedanke mich für Ihr Vertrauen und Ihre Aufmerksamkeit. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Halbling. In accordance with Article 14 of medmix Article of Association, today's annual general meeting will be chaired by me as chairman of the board of directors. The secretary of today's annual general meeting is Xavier Schops. As vote counters, I welcome Mr. Gian Plattner, UBS Switzerland AG, and Mr. Ralf Muser, Credit Suisse Switzerland. I also welcome Linus Schweitzer, the notary public who will prepare the public deed of today's annual general meeting. Minutes. The minutes of last year's annual general meeting of April 12, 2022 were duly signed by the chairman of the board and the company secretary and are available for inspection on medmix website. Electronic voting. Article 15, paragraph 2 of the Articles of Association stipulates that resolutions and elections carried out by electronic means procedures are deemed equivalent to written votes and elections. All shareholders attending the meeting received a voting device when registering at the entrance. Each device indicates the name of the shareholder. If you press the arrow at the bottom right, the number of votes you represent will be displayed. The arrow at the bottom left will take you back to your name. Voting is easy. Prior to each vote or election, the relevant item on the agenda is displayed in keywords on your device and in full on the screen behind me. You then have 10 seconds to cast your vote. If you want to accept the motion for the agenda item, press the J button standing for Ja. Obviously, German for yes I think a lot of people here are German speakers. If you want to reject the request, press the N button for Nein. If you wish to abstain from voting, press the E button standing for Enthaltung, in German abstain. The button you selected will light up. In the example case of J button for yes, if you make a mistake, simply press on the button you intended to press on and it will light up. To confirm your vote, press the button with the tick at the bottom right. This is very important, as otherwise your vote will not be counted by the voting system. The text, please wait, and as soon as your vote has been accepted by the voting system, the text voting registered will appear on your device. If your device is displaying please wait at the end of your voting, please go to the information table at the entrance to seek assistance. For the vote on the discharge under agenda item 3, the voting devices of those shareholders who are not legally allowed to take part in this vote have already been blocked in the system. This will be the case for the shares. This will also be the case for the shares held by Tivel Holding AG. We will now carry out a short test of the functioning of your devices. So the question is, will Switzerland take part in the next European Football Championship? If you vote yes, please press the J button for Ja. If you wish to abstain from voting, please press the E button for abstain. If you want to be negative and you want to press no, then you press the N button. If you have pressed the wrong button, simply press on the button that you wanted to press on in the first place. And finally, to confirm, press the button with the tick at the bottom right. Check on the device whether your choice has been registered. You now have 10 seconds to cast your vote. Voting starts now. All right, voting is closed. The result will follow shortly. Oh, I'm reassured. 99.4% of you think that Switzerland will take part in the next European Football Championship. So, whoever is responsible for the 0.4%, shame on you. All right, let's go back to our main program. I kindly ask all shareholders to leave the voting devices on their chair at the end of the annual general meeting for the share register to collect them. So leave them on your chair at the end of the meeting. We would like to point out that your voting results, as well as your personal information, will be erased prior to the collection by the share register. So there's full confidentiality. The annual general meeting will pass resolutions on the agenda items 1 to 8 by an absolute majority of the votes represented in accordance with Article 15, paragraph 1 of the Articles of Association, while pursuant to Article 16 of the Articles of Association and the Swiss Code of Obligations, agenda items 9.1 to 9.4 concerning the proposed revisions to the Articles of Association require a majority of at least 2/3 of the votes represented in order to pass. Given the number of participants, it's essential that all questions or comments from the shareholders are cast over the microphone so that everyone can hear you well. There's a standing desk at the front of the stage for this purpose. Shareholders would like to speak or asked to register at the information desk on the left-hand side of the room by no later than 10:15 in the morning. For the purposes of the minutes, please leave your name, your address, as well as your question or the topic that you want to raise. I ask the shareholders who have registered and wish to speak to take a seat in the front row. I will call on the registered speakers individually, and I will ask you to come to the desk at the front when the discussions on the relevant topic has been opened. You may speak in German or in English. Your questions will be translated. Please acknowledge that you may request to speak on topics that are related to any of today's agenda items or on matters foreseen by law or medmix Articles of Association. Speakers are requested to keep their speeches brief and to speak only on the matter at hand. I would ask you to limit your speaking time to a maximum of 2 minutes. Please also limit yourselves to a maximum of 1 speech per agenda item. If necessary, I will take the liberty of reducing the speaking time if there's a large number of speakers or if the speaking times are not adhered to, but I hope that will not be the case and that we will all have time to express ourselves. All right, for the sake of good order, I will also like to draw your attention to the fact that the entire annual general meeting will be recorded on video. Before we move on to the agenda, I would like to hand over to Gert Zimmermans, medmix Chief Executive Officer, to address a few remarks to you on the state of the business. Gert?
Thank you, Greg. Dear shareholders, dear sir, madam, my name is Gert Zimmermans, and I'm very pleased to present the key highlights of 2022 of your company. At this annual general meeting, we look back at our first complete business year as an independent company. The year was full of new products and commercial success. 2022 was also characterized by unusual and volatile geopolitical conditions. Yet, we successfully navigated through the year and reached our ambitious milestones. Our long-term customers, our strong business model, and the tireless efforts and engagement of our employees made this possible. We closed the financial year 2022 with a revenue of 477 million Swiss francs. This is an increase of 6% compared to the previous year. I'm pleased to say that all segments delivered accelerated revenue growth. As an exception, the industry segment was impacted by the closure of the plant in Poland. However, consumer and industry business area grew by 4%. Our strategic growth market, healthcare, grew 9% and capitalized on the recovery in scheduled treatments and elective surgeries. Adjusted EBITDA was 105 million Swiss francs, resulting in an adjusted EBITDA margin of 22%. This was driven by higher costs from the relocation of production, ongoing inflationary pressures, and the product mix. We have deconsolidated our Polish business and are in discussions to sell our manufacturing operations in Wrocław, Poland, following the decision made by the Polish government to place medmix Poland under sanctions in April 2022. Since then, we are well on our way to recovering our industry segment sales volumes in the fastest way feasible. We have increased production in our plants in Switzerland, the United States, and China. Going forward, we do not expect any long-term impact from this issue. 2022 was also a year of global expansion for medmix. A milestone in this journey was securing a site for our future state-of-the-art healthcare manufacturing facility in Atlanta, USA. Additionally, we acquired the plastics business of the Valencia-based Universal de Suministros. Our new plant in Valencia, Spain, will further support our industry segment capabilities in 2023. Lastly, we signed an agreement to acquire a majority stake in Xiaoyi, a Chinese beauty manufacturing business. In terms of sustainability, we proudly committed to the United Nations Global Compact. We act to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. In addition, medmix announced last month that we have committed to the scientific-based targets, adopting the 1.5C emission goal. We have successfully been assessed by CDP, the Carbon Disclosure Project. Separately, medmix has been awarded the best-in-class rating by EcoVadis. Looking ahead, we anticipate revenue growth above market rates across each of our segments. This would result in an expected revenue growth range of 5 to 7% in 2023. Adjusted EBITDA margin is expected to reach approximately 23% this year. This will be the result of returning to full capacity and a normalized cost base in industry, as well as improved revenue mix overall. Our medium-term ambition remains unchanged, with revenue growing at a compound annual growth rate of 8% and an adjusted EBITDA margin of 30%. This increase in profitability will be achieved through a further expanded share of revenue in the more profitable healthcare business area, as well as an enhancement in operational leverage. Our priorities for 2023 are first, the continuation on our path to innovation and sustainability. Second, the new plants in Valencia and Atlanta. Third, leveraging the Chinese beauty acquisition for local growth. And lastly, we will pursue acquisition opportunities where they create strong value. This is all from me, and back to you, Greg. Thank you.
Thank you, Geert. A word on governance. As previously announced, the board of directors has unanimously decided to nominate Rob ten Hut as the chairman of the board of directors for today's election. For election today, actually, I should say. This change comes in the course of my appointment as the chief executive officer and chairman of the management board of AkzoNobel last November, and the decision not to stand for re-election as chairman of medmix due to having too many mandates, but to remain subject to your vote as a regular member of the board of directors. Rob has been a member of the board of directors of medmix since 2022 and brings extensive experience in medmix's strategic markets, particularly in healthcare and devices. On behalf of the board of directors and management, we thank you, our valued shareholders, for your continuing trust and confidence in medmix. In the meantime, the presence of the shareholders has been determined. In terms of voting representation by shareholders, 141,204, and by the independent proxy, 29,067,063 shares. With that, we now move to the agenda items. Agenda item 1 reads as follows. Annual Report 2022. I'm sorry, the prompter's gone. Okay. The annual report containing the business review, the financial statement, and the consolidated financial statements, as well as the reports of the auditors, have been made available on the company website. I'd like to remind you once again of the income statement of our holding company, medmix. medmix Limited for the financial year 2022, starting on January 1st, 2022, and ending on December 31st, 2022. The parent company's account show an income of 27,033 Swiss francs and expenses of 12,763 million Swiss francs, resulting in a net profit of 14,270,000 Swiss francs. 270,000 Swiss francs. medmix Limited statutory financial statements have been prepared according to the account principles of the Swiss Code of Obligations. The auditor's report are included in the financial section of the annual report on page 170 and the following for the consolidated financial statements on page 188 and the following for the financial statements of medmix Limited. The page numbers refer to the annual reports available for download in PDF format from our website. I would like to thank KPMG for their work. Just before the annual general meeting, the representative of KPMG, who is present, informed me that he has no additional comments to make on the reports. I now open the discussion on the business review, the annual financial statements, and the consolidated financial statements for 2022, and the report of the auditors. The Board of Directors proposes that the business review, financial statements of medmix Limited, and consolidated financial statements for 2022 be approved. I ask those shareholders who want to approve the motion to press the J button for yeah on their voting device, otherwise the E button for abstention or the N button to reject the proposal. If you press on the wrong button, simply press a different button. To confirm your choice, press the tick button at the bottom right. Check on the device whether your choice has been registered. You have now 10 seconds to cast your vote. Voting starts now. Voting is closed. The result will follow shortly. Okay, votes in favor, 99.5%, 29,060,916 votes in favor. I note that you, dear shareholders, have approved the business review, financial statements of medmix Limited, and consolidated financial statements for 2022. medmix demonstrated a solid performance in 2022 despite the challenging conditions. This would not have been possible without the extraordinary performance and dedication of our employees. On behalf of the Board of Directors and the Executive Committee, I would like to therefore take this opportunity to thank all of our employees for their great commitment and performance. We now come to agenda item 1.2, the advisory vote on the compensation report. The Board of Directors proposes that the shareholders approve the compensation report 2022 as included on pages 63 to 89 of the annual report. This is a non-binding advisory vote. The compensation report sets out in detail the basic principles of medmix compensation policy and plans, as well as the compensation of the members of the Board of Directors and the Executive Committee. medmix compensation policies and plans are based on the company's performance, orientation, and on the strong focus on long-term shareholder value and profitable growth. They're reviewed annually and adjusted if necessary. medmix attaches importance to an appropriate compensation level. For the members of the Board of Directors, compensation consists of a fixed base salary in cash and the allocation of restricted stock units. Restricted stock units are entitlements to a future allocation of shares. The compensation of the medmix Executive Committee consists of the following components: the fixed compensation, meaning the base salary, as well as pension and fringe benefits; variable compensation, consisting of a short-term bonus plan and a long-term performance share plan, which are based on personal targets as well as corporate targets and dependent on the relative total shareholder return. The Board of Directors is convinced that these fixed and variable short-term and longer-term compensation components effectively ensure the alignment of the Executive Committee with the interests of the shareholders. I now open the discussion on the compensation report 2022. Does anyone request to speak? If there are no requests to speak, we proceed to the vote. The Board of Directors proposes that the compensation report 2022 as included in the annual report 2022 be approved. You now have 10 seconds to cast your vote. Voting starts now. Voting is closed. The results will follow shortly. Okay, the compensation report has been approved with 87.4% positive votes in favor, 25,539,804 votes in favor, 87.4% therefore approved. The board of directors would like to thank you for this. We interpret this as a sign of confidence that medmix compensation systems work in the interest of the shareholders. Okay, agenda item 2, appropriation of annual results. The board of directors proposes to distribute the total balance of 23,315,045 Swiss francs, comprising the net profit of 2022 of 14,269,773 Swiss francs, the retained profits of 4,045,272 Swiss francs, and the allocation from free reserves of 5 million Swiss francs as follows. Distribution of, as ordinary dividend, 20,457,417 Swiss francs. The balance to be carried forward, 2,857,628 Swiss francs. medmix pursues a dividend policy that takes into account the liquidity situation of the company and the economic situation. If this proposal is approved, the gross dividend before deduction of the Swiss withholding tax of 35% will amount to 50 cents per share, which is expected to be paid out on May 5th, 2023. All shares held by medmix Limited and its subsidiaries on the dividend record date shall not be eligible for dividends. I now open the discussion on the appropriation of the annual results 2022. Does anyone request to speak? If there are no requests to speak, we proceed to the votes. You now have 10 seconds to cast your vote. Voting starts now. All right, voting is closed. The result will follow shortly. Okay, the appropriation of annual results has been approved. Votes in favor, 96.7%. So votes in favor, 28,237,967 votes in favor. I note that the annual general meeting has approved the appropriation of the annual results as proposed by the board of directors. We now continue with agenda item 3, the discharge. The board of directors proposes that discharge be granted to the members of the board of directors and the executive committee for the financial year 2022. I remind you that pursuant to Article 695 of the Swiss Code of Obligations, those people who were involved in the management of the company do not have the right to vote on the present resolution. As already mentioned, this also applies to the shares held by Tivel. I now open the discussion on the discharge of the members of the board of directors and the executive committee. Does anyone request to speak? If there are no requests to speak, we proceed to the vote. You vote on the global discharge of the members of the board of directors and the executive committee. You now have 10 seconds to cast your vote. Voting starts now. Voting is closed and the results will follow shortly. Votes in favor, 99%, 12,287,788 votes in favor. I note that the annual general meeting has granted discharge to the board of directors and the executive committee. Thank you for the trust you've placed in us. We now come to agenda item 4, compensation of members of the board of directors and the executive committee. We will now vote, on the compensation of the board of directors and the group executive committee. Agenda item 4 is divided into 2 sub-items with 2 separate votes. Part 1 is the approval of the compensation of the board of directors, and part 2 is the approval of compensation of the Executive Committee. For detailed explanations on the approval of the proposed compensations, I refer to the separate report of the Board of Directors, which you received with the invitation to this annual general meeting. I will briefly speak on the 2 sub-items before we get to the 2 votes. I will start with the compensation of the Board of Directors. The maximum total amount proposed relates to the compensation of the Board of Directors for the term from today's annual general meeting to the annual general meeting 2024. The proposed maximum total amount of 1,500,000 Swiss francs is based on the compensation for 7 members of the Board of Directors. The member of the Board of Directors receive only a fixed compensation in order to ensure their independence. They do not receive any variable or performance-related compensation and are not entitled to participate in medmix pension plans. The compensation of the Board of Directors is partly paid in cash and partly in restricted stock units. I would not like to make a few comments on the compensation of the Executive Committee. The maximum total amount proposed relates to the compensation of the Executive Committee for the financial year 2024. We've announced our intention to enlarge the Executive Committee to better reflect the growth ambitions of medmix. The proposed amount of 8,500,000 Swiss francs covers the total compensation of the members of the enlarged Executive Committee and not of the Executive Committee as it stands today. The total compensation consists of a fixed base salary and a variable component. The variable component comprises a short-term performance-related bonus in cash and a long-term performance-related performance share unit, PSUs, plan. The system is designed to motivate above-average performance and to recognize performance accordingly. This is the maximum amount. In accordance with the legal requirements, the calculation of the maximum total amount of compensation for the Executive Committee takes into account the potential maximum amounts under the variable component of compensation, i.e. both the short-term and long-term incentive systems. The compensation actually paid will be disclosed in the compensation report for the financial year 2024, which is submitted to the shareholders for an advisory vote. Before proceeding to the binding votes, which are carried out individually, I open the discussion. Does anyone request to speak? If there are no requests to speak, we proceed to the vote. Your vote is on the approval for the total amount of compensation of the Board of Directors for the term from Annual General Meeting 2023 until the end of Annual General Meeting 2024 in the maximum amount of 1,500,000 Swiss francs. You now have 10 seconds to cast your vote. Voting starts now. Voting is closed. The results will follow shortly. 97.2% votes in favor for 28,391,792 votes in favor. I note that the annual general meeting has approved the maximum total compensation of the Board of Directors for the term from the annual general meeting 2023 until the end of the annual general meeting 2024. Thank you for your trust. Thank you for the trust you've placed in us. This brings us to the vote on agenda item 4.2. Your vote is on the approval of the total amount of compensation for the Executive Committee for the financial year 2023 and the maximum amount of 8,500,000 Swiss francs. You now have 10 seconds to cast your vote. Voting starts now. Voting is closed, and the results will follow shortly. Okay, 95.4% in favor for 27,877,964 votes in favor. I note that the annual general meeting has approved the maximum total compensation of the Executive Committee for the financial year 2024. Thank you for the trust you've placed in us. We now come to agenda item 5, the election of the board of directors. Agenda item 5 is divided into 2 sub-items with separate votes. Part 1 is the election of the chairman of the board of directors, and part 2 is the re-election of board members. We begin with part 1 of agenda item 5, the election of the chairman of the board of directors. As communicated earlier, I do not stand for re-election as chairman of the board of directors. Instead, Rob ten Hout, who's joined medmix board of directors last year, has been proposed by the board of directors for re-election as member of the board, as well as election as new chairman of the board of directors of medmix. So both a member of the board and chairman of medmix. Rob ten Hout is a Dutch national who's been living and working in Switzerland since 2006. He spent most of his career with Medtronic, one of the world's largest medical device company. He is currently the executive vice president and president global regions for Medtronic. Rob has gained more than 30 years of experience in the medical device industry in a broad variety of roles, including sales, marketing, and general management. As a board member of medmix since 2022, Rob is currently the chairman of medmix Nomination and Remuneration Committee. He studied in the Netherlands and graduated with a degree in commercial economy and a master's in marketing. As I said, Rob's son is getting married today, and Rob is therefore not able to participate in person in today's annual general meeting. We have therefore organized some words from Rob in the form of a short video.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear shareholders, welcome to this year's annual general meeting of medmix. Unfortunately, I cannot be with you in person today, but I'm pleased to introduce myself via this video message. My name is Rob ten Hout. I've been serving as a member of the board of directors of medmix since April of last year, and I'm also the chairman of the Nomination and Remuneration Committee at the company. I'm very honored by the unanimous decision of the board of directors to propose me as chairman of the board of medmix, subject to your election today. I'm a Dutch citizen, and I've been living in Switzerland with my family for the last 17 years. Over the last 30 years, I've led operations and people in the medical business around the world. I'm currently the Executive Vice President and President Global Regions of Medtronic, and as such, I'm a member of Medtronic's Executive Committee. Medtronic is a large US-listed medical device company that employs about 90,000 people around the world and operates in 150 countries. I'm the chairman of the board of MedTech Europe, the association representing the medical technology industry in Brussels, Europe. I am confident that with my experience, I will be able to guide medmix through this phase of growth and bring value to all stakeholders. I've been impressed by the resilience of medmix and its teams, the quality and the diversity of our clients, whom the company has been able to serve for so many years. Thank you all for your attention, and I wish you a fruitful annual general meeting. Thank you.
Okay, you've heard from Rob. I wish I could stand for re-election. I very much enjoy taking part in shaping the future of medmix, but once again, it's unfortunately not compatible with my functions as CEO and chairman of the management board of AkzoNobel. So I regretfully have to not stand for re-election as chairman, but I think that I'll be advantageously replaced by Rob if you choose to elect him. I think he'd be a very strong leader for our board, and I'd very much appreciate the opportunity to continue working with him. I now open the discussion on the re-election of Rob ten Hout as the chairman of the board of directors, and on his election as new chairman of the board of directors of medmix. Does anyone request to speak? If there are no requests to speak, we proceed to the vote. The Board of Directors proposes that the shareholders re-elect Rob ten Hout as a member of the Board of Directors and elect him as Chairman of the Board of the Directors for a term until the end of the next annual general meeting. You now have 10 seconds to cast your vote. Voting starts now. Okay, voting is closed and the results will follow shortly. Votes in favor, 80.7%, 23,560,533 votes in favor. I note that the annual general meeting has re-elected Rob ten Hout to the Board of Directors and elected him as the new Chairman of the Board of Directors for a term until the end of the next annual general meeting. I congratulate Rob on his election as Chairman, and we now come to part 2 of the agenda item 5, the re-election of board members. The Board of Directors of medmix consists of 7 individuals with an international and diverse background. The Board of Directors supports the re-election of all current members who are standing for re-election. That is Marco Musetti, Barbara Angern, René Willy, Daniel Flammer, David Metzger, and myself. Let us now come to the presentation and election of the members of the Board of Directors standing for re-election. Marco Musetti has been elected as member of the Board of Directors at the AGM 2021. He's the Vice Chairman of the Board of Directors and Chairman of the Audit Committee. Marco Musetti has been a member of the Board of Directors at several international companies and was also a member of the Board of Directors at Sulzer from 2011 to April 2021. Previously, he was Chief Operating Officer and Deputy CEO of Aluminium Silicon Marketing in the Sual Group, Head of Metals and Structured Finance Desk for Banque Cotonale Vaudoise, and Deputy Head of Metals Desk for Bruxelles Lambert. Marco?
For you, Greg. Greg Guillaume has been elected as member and Chairman of the Board of Directors at the AGM in 2021 and has been reconfirmed as Chairman of the Board at the AGM of 2022. He's currently member of the Nomination and Remuneration Committee. As previously mentioned, he does not stand for re-election as chairman, but has agreed to stay as an ordinary board member. And as a previous CEO of the Sulzer Group, he has in-depth knowledge of the medmix business. Back to you.
Okay, thank you, Marco. Barbara Angern has been elected as a member of the Board of Directors at the AGM 2022. She's a member of the Nomination and Remuneration Committee. Barbara was a member of the Executive Committee of Vifor Pharma, which was acquired in August 2021 by CSL, initially as Chief Business and Marketing Officer, responsible for all global commercial functions, as well as the overall nephrology portfolio. Then as the Chief Business and Operating Officer with responsibility for the technical operations, manufacturing, IT, and other corporate functions. René Willy has been elected as member of the Board of Directors at the AGM 2022. He's a member of the Audit Committee. Since 2021, René Willy has been Chief Executive Officer of the Global Oral Reconstruction Group and Henry Schein Incorporated, and a member of the Henry Schein Executive Management Committee. Daniel Flammer has been elected as a member of the Board of Directors at the AGM 2022. He's a member of the Audit Committee. Daniel has been managing partner at AR Financial Advisory AG in Zurich since April 2018, where he provides transaction advisory and CFO advisory services. David Metzger has been elected as a member of the Board of Directors in 2022. David Metzger is currently working for Livet Holding AG. Previously, he was investment director at Good Energies AG, senior manager at Bain & Company, and has also worked at Novartis and Morgan Stanley. Before we proceed to the re-elections, which will be carried out individually, I open the discussion. Does anyone request to speak? If there are no requests to speak, we proceed to the vote. We will start with the re-election of Marco Musetti under agenda item 5.2.1. The Board of Directors proposes the re-election of Marco Musetti as a member of the Board of Directors for a term until the end of the next annual general meeting. You now have 10 seconds to cast your vote. Voting starts now. Voting is closed. Results will follow shortly. Marco Musetti is re-elected as a member of the board of directors with 89.3% in favor, 26,092,760 votes in favor. I note that the annual general meeting has re-elected Marco Musetti to the board of directors for a term until the end of the next annual general meeting. We continue with the re-election of myself, Grégoire Pouguillaume, to the board of directors under agenda item 5.2.2. As I am personally involved in this agenda item for obvious reasons, I'm handing over to this item to the vice chairman of the board, Marco Musetti.
Thank you.
I will go on with the annual general meeting after the vote on the agenda item. Marco?
Thanks. The Board of Directors proposes to re-elect Greg Pouguillaume as member of the Board of Directors for a term until the end of the next annual general meeting. You now have 10 seconds to cast your vote. Vote starts now. Vote is closed. We're expecting the results.
Thank you very much for re-electing me with 95% of votes in favor.
Congratulations.
And 27,733,739 votes in favor. Thank you. Thanks, Marco. So once again, I note that the annual general meeting has re-elected me to the board of directors for a term until the end of the next annual general meeting. Thank you for your trust. We continue with the re-election of Barbara Angern under the agenda item 5.2.3. The board of directors proposes to re-elect Barbara as a member of the board of directors for a term until the end of the next annual general meeting. You now have 10 seconds to cast your vote. Voting starts now. Voting is closed. And Barbara's been re-elected with 99.4% votes in favor, 29,042,171 votes in favor. I note that the annual general meeting has re-elected Barbara Angern to the board of directors for a term until the end of the next annual general meeting. We continue with the re-election of René Willy. Under agenda item 5.2.4, the board of directors proposes the re-election of René as a member of the board of directors for a term until the end of the next annual general meeting. You now have 10 seconds to cast your vote. Voting starts now. Voting is closed. And René's been re-elected with 99.6% votes in favor, 29,090,884 votes in favor. I note that the annual general meeting has re-elected René Willy to the board of directors for a term until the end of the next annual general meeting. We continue with the re-election of Daniel Flammer under agenda item 5.2.5. The board of directors proposes to re-elect Daniel Flammers as a member of the board of directors for a term until the end of the next annual general meeting. You now have 10 seconds to cast your vote. Voting starts now. Okay, Daniel Flammer's been re-elected with 85.8% votes in favor, 25,058,528 votes in favor, and I hereby note that the annual general meeting has re-elected Daniel to the board of directors for a term until the end of the next annual general meeting. We continue with the re-election of David Metzger under agenda item 5.2.6. The board of directors proposes to re-elect David as a member of the board of directors for a term until the end of the next annual general meeting. You have 10 seconds to cast your vote. Voting starts now. Results coming. David's been reelected with 91.4% votes in favor, 26,707,118 votes in favor. I note that the annual general meeting has reelected David Metzger to the board of directors for a term until the end of the next annual general meeting. I thank you for your trust and congratulate the re-elected members of the board of directors on their re-election. The board of directors will meet after the annual general meeting, reconstitute itself, and publish the relevant decisions concerning the following: the election of the vice chairperson of the board of directors, the election of the chairperson of the nomination and remuneration committee, and the election and constitution of the audit committee, being the election of the members and of the chairperson. We now continue with agenda item 6, the election of the nomination and remuneration committee. We start with the re-election under agenda item 6.1. I do not stand for re-election to the nomination and remuneration committee. The board of directors proposes that the shareholders re-elect Barbara Engern as well as Rob ten Hout as the members of the nomination and remuneration committee for a term until the end of the next annual general meeting. Barbara and Rob both joined the nomination and remuneration committee in 2022. We'll proceed to the votes. We start with the re-election of Barbara under agenda item 6.1.1. The board of directors proposes to re-elect Barbara Engern as member of the nomination and remuneration committee for a term until the end of the next annual general meeting. You now have 10 seconds to cast your vote. Voting starts now. Okay, voting is closed. And Barbara is re-elected with 99.1% in favor, 28,942,068 votes. I note that the annual general meeting has re-elected Barbara Engern as a member of the nomination and remuneration committee for a term until the end of the next annual general meeting. We continue with the re-election of Rob ten Hout under agenda item 6.1.2. The board of directors proposes to re-elect Rob as a member of the nomination and remuneration committee for a term until the end of the next annual general meeting. You now have 10 seconds to cast your vote. Voting starts now. Voting is closed. Okay, votes in favor, 75.7%, 22,188,290 votes in favor. And to your point earlier, these are the lower percentage is in part a consequence of the recommendation by the proxy advisors to vote against the chairman, whether it's for the nomination committee or the chairmanship, as long as there's not a third of women on the board of directors. So it very well fits your point, and once again, your point is well taken. But I note that the annual general meeting has re-elected Rob as a member of the nomination and remuneration committee for a term until the end of the next annual general meeting. We now continue with the election of one new member of the nomination and remuneration committee under agenda item 6.2. The board of directors proposes to the shareholders that they elect David Metzger as a new member of the nomination and remuneration committee for a term until the end of the next annual general meeting. David has been elected to the board of directors in 2022 and has been re-elected today. Before we proceed to the election of David, I open the discussion. Does anyone request to speak? If there are no requests to speak, we proceed to the votes. You now have 10 seconds to cast your vote. Voting starts now. Okay, voting is closed. And David is elected with 85.9% votes in favor, 25,081,471 votes in favor. I note that the annual general meeting has elected David Metzger as a member of the nomination and remuneration committee for a term until the end of the next annual general meeting. We now come to agenda item 7, re-election of auditors. The Board of Directors proposes that the shareholders re-elect KPMG AG, Zurich, as auditors. Before we proceed to the re-election, I open the discussion. Does anyone wish to speak? Okay, there's no request to speak, so we proceed to the vote. You have 10 seconds to cast your vote. Voting starts now. Voting is closed. And votes in favor, 99.5%, 29,066,938 votes in favor. I note that the annual general meeting has re-elected KPMG AG as auditors. We now come to agenda item 8, the re-election of independent proxy. And the Board of Directors proposes that the shareholders re-elect Proxy Voting Services GmbH, Zurich, as independent proxy for a term until the end of the next annual general meeting. Proxy Voting Services GmbH fulfills the requirements of independence, in particular because it's not connected to medmix through any other activities. Does anyone request to speak? If there's no request to speak, we proceed to the vote. You now have 10 seconds to cast your vote. Voting starts now. Voting is closed. And votes in favor, 99.8%, 29,141,437 votes in favor. I note that the annual general meeting has re-elected Proxy Voting Services AG as independent proxy. We now come to today's last agenda, item 9, the revision of the Articles of Association. On June 19, 2020, the Swiss Parliament adopted a revision of the corporate law, which entered into force on January 1, 2023. The corporate law reform primarily aims to modernize Swiss corporate law and to strengthen shareholder rights. The new Swiss corporate law provides for a transitional period of 2 years, during which Swiss companies have to amend their corporate documents to reflect the changes in the law. Accordingly, the Board of Directors proposes to the shareholders to revise the Articles of Association at today's annual general meeting. In addition, the Board of Directors took this opportunity to propose a few additional updates to the Articles of Association, as further set out in this report. All amendments to the Articles of Association have been outlined in the report of the Board of Directors on the revision of the Articles of Association, which has been distributed to all shareholders together with the invitation for today's annual general meeting. I therefore assume that the proposed amendments to the Articles of Association are known to the annual general meeting participants. We will therefore neither read out the provisions of the Articles of Association individually or project them on the screen. Agenda item 9 is divided into 4 sub-items with 4 separate votes. Under agenda item 9.1, votes will be taken on amending the purpose of the company. Under agenda item 9.2, we have compiled amendments on the shares and the share register. Under agenda item 9.3, we have compiled changes on the shareholder rights. To the annual general meeting reserves the publication organ as well as notifications. And finally, under item 9.4, amendments relating to the Board of Directors compensation contracts with members of the Board of Directors and the Executive Committee, as well as mandates outside the group. I would like to note that the amendments 9.4 require a qualified majority of at least 2/3 of the votes represented at today's annual general meeting. Before proceeding to the votes, which are carried out individually for each agenda item 9.1 to 9.4, I open the discussion. Does anyone wish to speak? If there are no requests to speak, we proceed to the vote for agenda item 9. The Board of Directors proposes to approve the amendments to the Article 2 of the Articles of Association according to Section B1 of the report of the Board of Directors. You now have 10 seconds to cast your vote. Voting starts now. Voting is closed. Votes in favor, 99.6%, 29,098,387 votes in favor. I note that the annual general meeting has approved the amendments to Article 2 of the Articles of Association. I therefore ask the notary present, Mr. Schweitzer, to certify this result. We continue with the vote for agenda item 9.2. The Board of Directors proposes to approve the amendments to Articles 4, 6, and 6A of the Articles of Association according to Section B2 of the report of the Board of Directors. You now have 10 seconds to cast your votes. Voting starts now. Voting is closed. And votes in favor, 99.5%, 29,059,839 votes in favor. I note that the annual general meeting has approved the amendments to Articles 4, 6, and 6A of the Articles of Association. I kindly ask the notary present, Mr. Schweitzer, to certify this result. We continue with the vote for agenda item 9.3. The Board of Directors proposes to approve the amendments to Articles 7, 12, 14, 15, 16, 17, 36, and 38 of the Articles of Association according to Section B3 of the report of the Board of Directors. You now have 10 seconds to cast your vote. Voting starts now. Okay, this was a vote with a two-thirds majority. Votes in favor, 91.6%, 26,758,570 votes in favor. I hereby note that the annual general meeting has approved the amendments to Articles 7, 12, 14, 15, 16, 17, 36, and 38 of the Articles of Association. I kindly ask the notary present, Mr. Schweitzer, to certify this result. And we continue with the vote for agenda item 9.4. The Board of Directors proposes to approve the amendments to Articles 18, 19, 21, 22, 30, 32, and 33 of the Articles of Association according to Section B3 of the report of the Board of Directors. You now have 10 seconds to cast your vote. Voting starts now. Voting is closed. And votes in favor, 99.5%, 29,064,211 votes in favor. I hereby note that the annual general meeting has approved the amendments to Articles 18, 19, 21, 22, 30, 32, and 33 of the Articles of Association. I kindly ask the notary present, Mr. Schweitzer, to certify this result. With that, I now close this year's annual general meeting. Dear shareholders, I thank you for your interest in medmix and for your continued trust in the company. We're looking forward to welcoming you at the next annual general meeting in 2024. In the meantime, you're cordially invited to the reception that will take place in the foyer. We'll be present, and we look forward to interacting. And we wish you a great day and a wonderful weekend. And thank you again for being here today. Thank you.